All across ocean and land, incumbent on all men, is the pilgrimage to Mecca, fifth pillar of Islam, in the footsteps of Muhammad, the last prophet of Allah.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Hajj Demystified, how to understand the wisdom behind the acts of Hajj so that our acts of worship are not done just physically without our hearts working and without reaping the fruits of our ibadah, and that is to have the taqwa, the fear of Allah, to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to enjoy our life being Muslims. And when people just do physical things without the hearts working and without understanding the wisdom behind doing things, things becomes very dry. And a person is not able to enjoy the submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a level of happiness that only those who would taste it will understand what it means. And that is to fully submit oneself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When all means and odds and all of these things would say one thing, and then the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say another thing. The believers would submit themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this definitely will bring what is good. And we see that in the orders from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Hajj. A person would pay money, would take the time out, would sacrifice and go through difficulties and struggle and challenges and physical challenges in the journey of Hajj. And there is nothing in return in this life. Nobody is being paid in Hajj as a return of this effort. But why people do all of this, seeking rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And when they do that, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most grateful. Hearts can change. Purification of the heart and being steadfast on the deen of Allah, especially when a person is eager to follow the sunnah, the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Very strictly, in the most perfect way. A person will see the blessings of following the way of the Prophet ﷺ in a way that he would never even think that this would ever happen. One of which is to follow what the Prophet ﷺ said and did. And in Hajj, as we know, the Prophet ﷺ gave khutbah, sermon to the people in the day of Arafah. And he gave them this farewell khutbah, khutbah al-wada', the farewell khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ to his ummah, to the companions, those who were present, and he ordered them to convey it to those who are absent. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept it till today, present, alive in the lives of the Muslims, what the Prophet ﷺ said in the farewell sermon, and ordering the people to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and to guard their religion, and to protect their honor and dignity by being believers and following the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ordering them to honor and to witness the relationships in the most perfect way. And one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ said when everybody was gathered, and he said, كُلُّ الْمُسْلِمِ عَلَى الْمُسْلِمِ حَرَامٌ, that everything of a Muslim is haram on another Muslim. دَمُهُ وَمَالُهُ وَعِرْضُهُ, his blood, his wealth, and his honor and dignity. And the Prophet ﷺ said that clearly to the people, that the Muslim is haram, is sacred, is forbidden on another Muslim. And then he said, what is forbidden? One's blood, to shed blood, to cause harm to someone physically. This is forbidden, this is haram. This is something that is a major sin that can lead to what is worse. And the wealth of the Muslim, it's forbidden. And also, unless a person is buying and selling and so on, and also his honor and dignity. Something for us to reflect upon. When people in Hajj, and they would see a representative for every Muslim group or nation or race on the face of earth present in Hajj. A believer would witness this ummah at large, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make him stand next to someone that is from the furthest point on earth to him, but all of a sudden he get to see his brother in faith, his brother for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That this brother that is far away from him physically, from a different part of the world, that the Prophet ﷺ said that this Muslim, his blood is haram on you to shed, and his wealth and his honor and dignity. We're living at a time when it's not just physical harm that a person can do, which is still present. How easy it is for people now to shed blood, which is so evil, with evil acts that is against the way of the Prophet ﷺ, disobeying the Prophet ﷺ by killing one another. And not just that, by the word of mouth that can help for the bloodshed of another Muslim. And it's very easy for these things to happen with the ease of communications, with social media, where people would get angry with one another, would spread rumors. A person might be insane on the other side, or evil person in his heart, and he would act based on someone is being calling him to do evil, calling him to be an extremist, right? And a person would fall into this level of extremism and cause harm to others. Not just the one that did the physical act, but everybody will share the crime. And this is the importance of this. And the Prophet ﷺ warned his ummah that every Muslim on another Muslim is haram, his blood and his wealth. Not to steal, not to bribe, not to take anything without the rights to do so. Buying and selling and transactions, that becomes very complicated nowadays. And if a person is not aware of what is halal and what is haram, more likely that the person would fall into some haram transactions, taking the wealth of others without the right to do so, whether knowing or not knowing, something that the Prophet ﷺ forbade, something that people in Hajj should not ruin their Hajj by being at ease when it comes to matters of sin. And al-ird, one's honor and dignity. Al-ird, or honor and dignity, comes when a person would defame someone else, would defame another Muslim, would say bad things about him, would backbite him, slander, even to the extent of which not lowering the gaze when it comes to looking at other Muslim, for men to look at women and for women to look at men. When a person walking with his wife, this is his wife, not for everybody to look at her. And this is the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and for the man to protect his honor and dignity by ordering the women in his family, his wife, his mother, his children, to cover and to wear the hijab, the cloth of modesty, to protect themselves from this betrayal of people attacking the honor of one another that starts with the look and then it leads to what is worse. And the Prophet ﷺ warned this ummah from falling into these evil actions. One of the most destructive sins is when a person would commit zina with the wife of his neighbor, as the Prophet ﷺ said. And these things happen one step after another, when people would compromise the orders of Allah and not follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ had the most concern towards his ummah. And that's why the believers, they need to humble themselves and obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and follow the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's important to reflect upon what the Prophet ﷺ said to his ummah in this day, in Hajj. And he ordered them to convey this to those who are absent. And he ordered the men to take care of their women, of their wives, to take care of them. And he said that إِنَّهُنَّ عَوَانٌ عِنْدَكُمْ, they are like prisoners with you, because the woman is ordered to be obedient to her husband, and the husband is ordered to be kind to his wife. This is how families are built in Islam. And not to be fooled by the ways of the disbelievers, when they would adorn their words and deceive others with some words that might sound nice, but in reality it's so much evil. When they talk about liberty, but liberty is nothing but to get people to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to be slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they think that to liberate women is to make women have free relationships outside the fold of marriage, and to have free mixing between men and women, and all of these evil things that breaks families, that takes away from the rights of the children to have a healthy environment, healthy family where there's a father and a mother. And this is all the rights of the human beings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala secured for them. But the disbelievers, they refuse to follow the ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for the believers to be alert and to see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants what's best for them, to give more importance to the values of the family, for the women in Islam to wear hijab, for men to also cover their awrah, to take care of their wives, and for the wives to be obedient to their husbands, to raise their children. This is the most important thing in their life, to raise them to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and not that the goals of both men and women to compete with one another, who would have more provisions, who would have more wealth, as if this is the purpose of our life, is to earn more and more and to accumulate wealth. That we become not satisfied and content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides by the husband going seeking provisions. You would find most of the families, also the women, will go out and seek provisions. And who are lost in the midst of all of this? These are the children in the families. They're not being raised in the proper way to seek more wealth, to have more provisions. And the Prophet ﷺ had warned us. And he said that the fitna for this ummah, a trial for this ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, is al-mal, is wealth. We understand that this is a very important thing in our life, which is wealth. This is how even people go for Hajj. But to put it in the right perspective, that the wealth is nothing but a mean to establish the deen of Islam, not to compromise our religion because of seeking wealth. So these are all means where people are to protect the wealth of one another, to have the concern towards one another, to protect one's honor and dignity by controlling our words and our tongues, not to backbite, not to slander, because the Muslim is sacred, the Muslim is protected, is honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said. So he also alayhi salatu wasalam, as we heard, he ordered the men to take care of their women and to teach them their religion and to provide for them and to be kind to them. This is all from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And he alayhi salatu wasalam, he said that whoever is obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reward them a great reward. And he said, "O Allah, I fulfilled my mission. I conveyed the message." And he made the people witness that he had conveyed the message, and he did, alayhi salatu wasalam. Now it's our responsibility to take that message and to apply it in our life and to convey it the same way the Prophet ﷺ conveyed it to others. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from these acts of worship and from these blessed days of Dhul Hijjah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
All across ocean and land, incumbent on all men, is the pilgrimage to Mecca, fifth pillar of Islam, in the footsteps of Muhammad, the last prophet of